Welcome to our webinar on toddlers and transitions. On this webinar, we're going to talk about 9 secrets to get toddlers to listen and behave better. So, what are some of the problems that we find with toddlers? Why are they so difficult? Why do they call it the terrible twos? Personally, I often refer to it as the terrific twos, because one of the most important things when we're dealing with toddlers is really to switch our own approach with toddlers, our own perspective. And by doing that, we can understand better their needs, understand where they are at, and then approach and respond to them in much more effective ways to help shift their behavior in such a way that we can deal with it and manage it, and they will become more terrific rather than being such terrible little monsters. But until we make that shift, until we can connect with them and use these 9 different secrets to help them listen and behave better, it can be a nightmare dealing with a toddler who's hyperactive, running around, who doesn't listen, and who might be aggressive. So oftentimes toddlers will throw fits and temper tantrums. They might get desperate, nagging, fussy, very difficult to please, demanding, or they might just be overly messy, making a mess of things, dropping stuff, having a hard time keeping it together, not listening or ignoring the parents, resisting bedtime or bath time or any other type of thing, not sharing. Sometimes they don't want to share things with other children, or aggressive type of behaviors, which we can often see, especially when toddlers invite a new baby into the family. They might start exhibiting aggressive types of behaviors. So we're going to talk about 9 secrets to get toddlers to listen and behave better and to fuss less. Now, I call them secrets, but in actual fact, they're all very common sense information. And once you see them, you'll see how simple they are to apply. Because any technique that's too complicated, too complex, is really hard to implement. But the methods that we use are based around the democratic parenting principles and based on overarching human psychology and communication principles. That's why they work with toddlers. That's why they work with pretty much anybody. But we just have to adjust the approach and the way we apply them based upon the age of the person and where they're at developmentally. Okay, so the first secret is presence, being present to the toddler, knowing where they are at, both mentally, emotionally, and physically, and meeting them where they are at. Because until we can kind of stop from trying to get them to keep up to where we're at, or the pace of the household or your own pace, and understand where they are at, come back to the rhythm or pace that they're going at, then we can meet them from there and help them through any type of transition or difficulty that they might be struggling with. And the moment that they sense your presence, the moment that they feel that you're actually aware and listening to them and caring and are meeting them where they're at, that creates a dramatic shift in their attention, and they can physically feel that you're listening and paying attention, and from there they'll move forward and be much easier to deal with. Okay, so the next one is awareness. Okay, and awareness about rhythms. Being aware of their own rhythms, what's best for them, the family rhythms, and also constructing new rhythms that make it much easier for toddlers to keep up to. Now, with rhythms, we have to keep in mind the ups and the downs, okay? Sometimes, during the day, it's quite busy. You have to get out the door, get the children to daycare, or get yourself to work, and then pick them up and back home and get dinner ready and clean up and do all these things. So at some points in the rhythms, it's quite fast-paced. But toddlers especially, they need time for slower rhythms to help them process all the information. You see, the toddler years are a time in a child's development where they are learning so much. They're learning how to walk and to coordinate their body. The spatial awareness is changing constantly because they are growing also at such a pace. They are increasing their articulation with how they use words, how they express their needs. They're learning new words all the time and different ways to communicate. And they're also watching the world around them. And so it's really the stage between baby years and young child. So they're going from a baby who has very little capacity to talk or walk and communicate, and they're learning how to communicate their needs and how to get what they want and how to keep up with the family flow. They're also learning a lot about the routines and stuff that are in the household. So awareness of the rhythms that are currently guiding your household, and seeing how those rhythms might be affecting your child both positively and negatively is the very first step, okay? Because you might find that you're just a bit too fast-paced rhythm. There's just too much stimulation in your child's life. They never have enough downtime to process everything that they're experiencing. Now, the need for processing is just vitally important for a toddler, and really for anybody, because we're constantly bombarded by information, stimulation from the outside, and also dealing with our own internal feelings and emotions that come up as a response to both the outside stimulation and also sometimes internal issues as well. So when we're bombarded by too much experience or information, stimulation, emotions, feelings, we need to process them. It's just like if you have a cup that's full, that's already full of water, and you're trying to pour more into it, trying to teach a toddler something new, or trying to get them to listen to you, but they can't because their cup is already full. They need to process some of the information or experience that they already have in order to make room to receive more. Okay, and this is very crucial, and a lot of what we're going to talk about on these 9 secrets is around this need for processing, and what we're doing is talking about different ways to process it, okay? So awareness is the first step, just being aware of the rhythms that you have in your house, and and also the rhythms that work best for your specific toddler, because everybody is different. Even if you have twins and they're both toddlers, you'll see that each one sometimes has a different pace or a different rhythm, and we can adjust our approach to them and oftentimes the pace of our whole household in order to accommodate them a little bit. And of course, as a parent, we're used to accommodating our lives and making shifts for our children, and we need to do that sometimes in new ways. And we don't want to do it in a completely self-sacrificing way where our own needs go unmet too, because then you'll be emotionally drained. One of the biggest mistakes I see that parents make is they don't take the time and space to fill up their own emotional cup. And you need to do that, to fill up your own cup in order to be more present, more there for your child. Okay, so first is awareness of the rhythms, and then constructing new rhythms or making shifts in the rhythms to allow for some downtime, for some quiet time. If your toddler's going all day from daycare and stimulation all day long, and they get home and you put them in front of the television or some type of excessive stimulation, that can also have a negative impact because they never have that time to really just to have zero stimulation to process their experiences. We'll talk about that in one of the later secrets as well. So first secret, presence, meeting the child where they're at, and that really ties into the second secret, is when you meet the child where they're at, you can see how they might be dealing with the rhythms in their day, and sometimes that they might have, if you pick them up from daycare, you might notice that they're a bit more anxious or irritated, and meeting them where they're at, and then making adjustments or constructing your rhythm to help them process their experience a little bit better in order for them to be more present and to not be overwhelmed by their own types of stress that could be accumulated and making it impossible for them to listen and to behave. And then, one of the surest ways to tell if a child is overwhelmed or stressed, even just emotionally or even just by the sheer excess of information, stimulation, experience, is that they might just be overly fussy and demanding and needy, and nothing is really pleasing them, because you can see that the emotions or feelings are just brimming under the surface. Okay, so let's go on to the third one. The third secret is connective communication. Okay, and I have an entire chapter in my book, Democratic Parenting, on connective communication. And the connective communication is really simply communicating in such a way that you connect with the other person. Okay, so you can use it with anyone, really, this type of connective communication. And what you want to try to do is to remember that, the 90% of your communication isn't the words that you speak. It's really it has to do around the tone of your voice, the where you're taking the conversation, what you might be implying in the feelings and emotion of the conversation. It also has to do with your body language. Okay, so connected communication with toddlers, we have to understand that their communication abilities are not nearly as advanced as us. They don't have the same vocabulary, but they can surely understand the tone of your voice, right? They can surely get the nuances of emotions that come through your tone of voice. And also with your body language, right, and the pace of what you speak. So with toddlers, the key with connected communication is, one, the tone of voice, to speak in a loving, connected way, so that they can feel that you want to connect to them, that they have your attention, that you're present with them, that you hear them, okay? But also you want to have a certain firmness, especially if you're setting a limit or directing them, okay? So that they don't feel that there's leeway or that they can ignore you. So it's really it's trying to master that balance of being firm, but also being kind and gentle in your tone of voice in such a way where they respect it and they listen to it at the same time. Another big part of connected communication is with toddlers is to, the biggest issue that toddlers have has to do around transitioning from one thing to another, because they often will get into a rhythm, and toddlers, given the opportunity, have an incredibly focused attention span. They can really dive into something, like painting or playing, and really go into it for quite a while, and they really get into the rhythm of it. And so sometimes disrupting that rhythm, or disrupting their play, or moving from someone's house that you might be visiting on a play date, or from the playground to going back in the car and going home, or leaving home to go somewhere, these transitions can sometimes be the hardest for toddlers. And so by communicating to them, by giving them information about the upcoming transition, it can help prepare them for that. So you can let them know that you're going to be leaving, in 10 minutes or very soon. Now, of course, toddlers don't have the same awareness of time. So if you say 10 minutes, 5 minutes, it doesn't necessarily mean anything to them. But as you communicate this more, it sets the stage so that they can understand time a bit better and eventually kind of keep up and know what you're implying around the time of things. So, but the key here is really just communicating them, letting them know that there's going to be a change happening, right? Letting them know and preparing them verbally for the transition as well. Telling them about things, communicating to them about what's happening and what you're going to do next. If in the morning time, communicating that they're going to get dressed, and then they're going to eat, and just kind of giving them a roadmap for the transition out of the house, kind of guiding them in advance with your words and communicating that to them. And it kind of helps prepare them and gets them in the mindset, helps their intention kind of link with yours to move out the door and to transition somewhere else, right? So it's really because they're physically, emotionally, and mentally in the space where they're at. And that's one of the most amazing thing about toddlers and young children. They are so entirely in the moment, entirely present. And, oftentimes the hardest time we have as adults to kind of meet them where they're at is to get present, because we're always in our minds, we're planning, we're thinking, about the next steps, or we're thinking about something that happened, or these types of things. So sometimes our biggest challenge is to get present, to get in the moment with them, where the toddlers are, and young children are just completely in the moment. And the biggest challenge that we have with them is to try to get them to kind of think ahead and move forward in a direction outside of what they're currently engaged in. So by just using words and communicating with them, you can kind of guide them out of whatever they're engaged in into where you're going, where you want to go with them, okay? So that's how you use connective communication with toddlers and young children, okay? And there's other ways that we use it as well, especially when we come into the next secrets around setting limits and dealing with emotions. Now, the fourth secret is understanding control patterns, okay? So I talk about this again in my book, Democratic Parenting, in the chapter on setting limits. Now, what are control patterns? Okay, these are basically patterns that people engage in order to suppress or deal with their intense feelings or emotions, okay? So sometimes when they're upset or angry, or they experience some type of mild to severe stress or even trauma, or a type of prolonged stress that can accumulate, they'll develop a control pattern to help them control those feelings, to distract themselves from them so that they can continue functioning, Okay, so it's very common for toddlers to develop control patterns around pacifiers, soothers, sucking their thumbs, biting their nails, blankies, favorite toys or teddy bears, or sometimes other types of control patterns that can develop as well. Like, for example, children who are avoiding bedtime, they'll say that they're hungry just to kind of prolong the bedtime, right? Just at the time that they need to go pee or go to the bathroom, and you find that even they just went pee or they just went to the bathroom, but it's something that they know that you respond to. It's a pattern that they've become aware of that they can use to get out of something that they don't want to be engaged in. For example, going to bed, or getting getting dressed or something like that. They'll use whatever pattern that they've discovered helps them get out of the situation, or move away from their feelings. Okay, so the important thing here is really to understand control patterns, because control patterns will shift and they can change over time, right? If you start to limit one control pattern, the same tendency of controlling a feeling or emotion can develop later on. There's lots of different ways that control patterns develop. Sometimes young children will go off by themselves into a corner, right, to kind of deal with their feelings and that kind of thing, and that can develop. And the thing this interesting thing about the developmental psychology behind control patterns is that as adults, we also develop control patterns as well. And oftentimes, the way that we deal with emotions or strong feelings are kind of the same patterns that we learned really young. So maybe if we're punished or we did something wrong when we were young, or felt really kind of isolated or hurt by some type of interaction, we might have turned, to some type of action or ways of communicating, maybe throwing a fit or yelling, or sometimes moving away and going inward. And as you grow up, you find that you do the same type of behavior, right? That's why any type of psychological therapy usually connects the current behavioral issues with their childhood, right? Because most of our emotional problems as adults go back to our childhood. And that's the whole point of using democratic parenting, as to reduce the amount of emotional traumas in the youth, reduce the control patterns that happen, and to allow children to express and to drain their emotions and feelings as much as possible so that they can approach life from a place of clear thinking, good judgment, a zest, without being clouded or fogged by stress or intense feelings. Because if that stress and intense feelings are not drained, are not released, they maintain there, and then the control patterns or the ways of interacting will continue, right? Continue right through into their adulthood, and then eventually they find themselves going through a midlife crisis, or going through divorces, or having other types of problems later in their adult years that they can connect back to their own childhood. Had this been solved in the early years, they wouldn't be dealing with it now. So the whole reason behind the Parent Learning Club and democratic parenting is to reduce these emotional childhood traumas as much as possible by helping our children be completely present and not weighed down by these intense negative feelings or stress that are just a natural part of life. We can't avoid stress in life, but we can avoid a lot of some of the intense ones, and assist and help our children to drain and release that so they can approach life from a much clearer head and a much more open and courageous heart. Okay, so understanding that control patterns are there, being aware of them, seeing them as they come up, and then that allows us to intervene and to adjust our behavior and to respond to those in a good way. Okay, so the next secret to get children to behave better is to understand how children heal through tears. Now, being a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine, my whole approach with my patients is to help them find natural ways to heal themselves without using pharmaceutical drugs, chemicals, and to avoid surgeries and some of the more invasive medical procedures when possible. Of course, it's not always possible. Sometimes pharmaceuticals are necessary, and surgeries are can be complete lifesavers in many circumstances. But oftentimes, with a lot of chronic issues, health issues, even surgeries and pharmaceuticals don't help. And so those are the types of people I see in my clinical office that come in and they have these health problems. And what I've discovered, and what many people have discovered, in the modern science has also recently confirmed, is the incredibly negative effect of stress hormones on someone's health. Okay, so it really has to do around the fight or flight axis in the hormonal system of the body, where extreme stress or prolonged stress causes a lot of types of cortisol and adrenaline to go into the bloodstream, and these are meant, this is part of the fight or flight, so these are meant to kind of come into our system to give us an excess of physical energy to fight a danger. For example, back to our survival instincts of fighting a saber-toothed tiger when we used to be cavemen, and we would need this instinct in order to survive, or to run, to flight, right, away from a danger. So we get this increase in these hormones that rush into our system the moment we feel fear, and that gives us this energy in order to escape it. And as we exude this energy in the natural environment by fighting or running, then the hormones dissipate. They get used up in our body, and then they leave our body, and then we come back and we're clear and we're calm. Now, in the modern world, we have so much types of low-level stress that this fight or flight syndrome kind of gets activated, and these hormones get released into the system, but not always as intense as if we're being attacked by a tiger. But it's kind of a lower level of feeling like that. We feel like we're we might get fired from our work, or just insecurity, or just this constant stimulation, or just driving on the road. That's a level of stress. There's lots of different stresses that come at us. In my book, I talk about 4 specific types of stress that can affect us, right? We have situational stress, aggressive stress, passive stress, and then children also are affected by birth stress. Now, what happens is that these stress hormones really have a negative effect on our entire body if they stay within our body. They affect our thinking, they affect our judgment, they affect our behavior, okay? And one of the best ways to heal these, there's lots of ways to heal these, but one of the best ways to heal ourselves from stress are through tears, through crying. And this is really one of our most natural instincts. And we see this in children, babies, and toddlers, right? They will easily and naturally cry when they don't get what they want, or when they feel upset. And, unfortunately, our culture has the instinct, or maybe not instinct, but the cultural mores of suppressing these tears. And there is an instinctual component in this, because the crying phenomenon really triggers our instinctive drive as parents to make sure our children are okay, right? And oftentimes they are completely physically fine, but it's just emotionally they need to drain some of these feelings that have built up. Now, and if we let our children drain these feelings, then they go right out, and the child returns to a more present, happy, zestful state of awareness. And I've seen this time and time again with toddlers who are fussy, needy, kind of irritated, not listening, aggressive, angry, just unhappy generally, that if we help them, just allow them to cry, to let those feelings out, then they come back and their awareness is completely shifted. Especially toddlers, that are bumping into things, or tripping, or hurting, or hurting themselves, or spilling things, and their spatial awareness just doesn't seem to be there. This can sometimes be due to just an excess of stress in the system that is affecting their coordination and their spatial awareness. And by allowing them to drain these strong feelings through tears, it can really do almost, it looks like a miracle to bring them back to a present state. And how many times have you yourself seen how much better you feel after having a good cry if you feel really emotionally hurt or upset by some type of circumstances? Sometimes by crying is one of the best things that you can possibly do. So by understanding the healing power of tears, and by not always trying to avoid it or distract our toddlers from crying, but allowing them to actually drain those strong feelings when necessary, it can go a really long way to getting them to behave better and to emptying that full cup, which I talked about. If their cup is completely full with feelings and emotions and too much stimulation, they can't hear or listen or take in anything more, and they just start behaving in all types of erratic ways. But by crying, it literally drains that cup. And so then they can be a lot more present because it drains all those strong feelings. Now, one thing to remember is that oftentimes listening to the strong feelings in a child or another person triggers our own feelings that we never had a chance to release as well. Okay, so by helping our children, by being aware of that, we can work through our own feelings and work through our own resistance to listening to our child's feelings. So if you're listening to them cry, and have a bit of release these strong feelings, don't be surprised if you feel your own emotions or stress or past hurts that you never had a chance to let out get triggered as well. Okay, you might feel irritated or frustrated or feel unhappy, and oftentimes, especially with fathers or male caregivers, because the men and boys are often encouraged not to cry. When we hear or listen to a child cry, sometimes it can really upset us. It can irritate us. And I've talked to many men who were physically punished and hurt if they showed any type of crying or tears. It was very suppressed in our culture for boys especially. So, and girls as well, growing up, in many cultures, it's not accepted to cry either. So remember that the strong feelings in others can trigger our own strong feelings. Also remember that all feelings have a beginning and an end. And sometimes listening to our child cry and cry is one of the most difficult things we can do. But if we're present with our child, we keep using connective communication, encouraging to let their feelings out, letting them know that we're there, they won't feel completely abandoned or lonely during that. I don't recommend, letting them cry all alone, especially toddlers in their room, because it can be a very isolating experience. And it's much nicer to have a parent there with them, knowing that they're being listened to, knowing that they have their good attention, and that crying is really okay. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a way of letting out strong feelings and emotions so you can release them and come back to being present and engaged in interactions and in the family and relationships again. Time and time again, I see it in my clinic and other people, in life, who they're just overwhelmed with feelings from unresolved issues in their past and sometimes their childhood, and what they really need is just to have a lot of really good cries, let that out so that they can come back to reality a little bit and be more present with the people they're with, because they're still reacting to triggers emotionally that have to do with old circumstances they never fully resolved. Okay, so that's understanding the healing power of tears is the fifth secret. Now, the sixth secret is setting kind yet firm limits. And this is one thing I see a lot of parents struggle with, is the ability to set these firm limits and balance that between the kindness and the firmness, because either parents go too firm and too strict and that's it, and you're in trouble, and then their voice gets aggressive and angry, and that will trigger the child's fear response. And by triggering the child's fear response, you immediately put them in the amygdala part of the brain. And the amygdala is what was called the lizard brain, the survival brain. Okay, and that triggers the fight or flight response, which triggers the stress hormones, which reduces their ability to listen and to behave, because now they're acting out of stress, and their higher thinking functions of the frontal cortex get turned off. And this is called amygdala hijacking, this phenomenon. It's well known and documented by the scientific community. It's when people get too emotional and they act irrational, and then afterwards they think, what was I doing? What was I thinking? I wasn't thinking in advance. My judgment was turned off because they were just caught up in these emotions. Okay, so that's the problem of being too strict or getting angry with toddlers, and and setting strict limits. But you can set firm limits and be kind at the same time. The opposite end of the spectrum is more the permissive type of parent. The problem that they fall into is that their limits actually don't hold weight. They'll say they set a limit, and then their toddler goes right over it and they don't say anything, or the toddler asks or whines a couple of times and they give in to that demand or request, right? So for example, the great time to set these limits is when your child might be exhibiting a control pattern, right? You're trying to put them to bed. They just went pee, right? They don't have to pee anymore. But then they tell you that they have to go pee, right? So that it's a control pattern. That they're just trying to out of going to bed. But, many parents just say, okay, go ahead, and they give in to that. And the moment you give in to that is that you reduce your own credibility as the authority in the family. And then you don't give them an opportunity to actually to face those feelings that they're trying to avoid. Because control patterns are all about avoiding their feelings, their emotions, their fears, right? But by putting a limit there, it gives them an opportunity to face them, to work through them. And, that's the wonderful and amazing thing about fears, is that the moment you face them and look at them and start to go into them, they dissolve, because really they're illusions, right? Most of the fears, right? Now, fear is a really interesting phenomenon to look at, and oftentimes it comes from an experience in the past. Maybe the child felt isolated, or at one time going to bed, they couldn't sleep, and they heard something, and so then they got scared for a moment, just because of this sheer isolation of sometimes being in a large dark room all alone at night. Right, so they might have a fear about that, or they might they might also just feel that they need extra attention or connection with you, and they just haven't had enough that day. So or they might have other types of emotions that are just kind of brimming at the surface that is for them hard to deal with. So they try to avoid those feelings by delaying bedtime, and also getting more time with you as the parent, right? More connecting time. Even if it's not, on a positive note of connection, they're still kind of aiming for that. Okay, so, but by setting a firm limit, and kind limit, you say, sweetie, you just went to the washroom. I don't think you need to go to the bathroom. So then what happens? Then the toddler will usually start to increase the sense of anxiety and the desperation in their tone of voice, telling you that they have to go, and they might start to whine, and they might start to whimper, and soon the tears will be flowing, they're fussing, and they might throw a big temper tantrum in a fit, okay? And most parents at that point, when it starts to escalate, they know where it's going, and the parents themselves, their own fear gets activated, and they try to avoid that, okay, by giving in to that request. But when you give into it, you don't allow the child a chance to actually drain those feelings, to work through it, to let it go, so that they can come back present and free of those feelings, and then oftentimes they sleep much better too. And that's that comes into the whole sleeping phenomenon, where a lot of parents struggle because their children don't sleep through the night, and most of the time I've seen that the reason why children aren't sleeping through the night is because of an excess of feelings and emotions that have accumulated throughout the day that they never had a chance to process or drain. And oftentimes in these situations, the child will give many cues that they want to drain these feelings, right? With the desperation, with the whining, the fussing over all types of different things, the control patterns, all these types of things are cues that they're telling their parent they have these issues, these strong feelings, and they want to kind of release them. They don't know how. But if you set the limit there around any of these things to create kind of an emotional cocoon, a safety net around the child, so that they can release these feelings, that you're telling them, what, I'm not going to let you distract yourself from these fears or feelings anymore. Why don't you just drain them, okay? And I'll be here. I'm going to hold this space, this attention, with my love, my attention, for you to just let go of these feelings, to cry, to move, to thrash, to rage, to tantrum as much as you need to, and I'll make sure that you're safe. You're not going to hurt yourself by banging your head on anything, and you're not going to hurt me or anybody else if you do start to get really rageful in your tantrum. And being an adult and being larger and more agile, you'll be able to easily keep yourself safe and the child safe as they work through these strong feelings. Remember, like I said before, all strong feelings have a beginning and an end. So by being aware of this, you can rest assured that once they work through these feelings, there is an end to the tantrum, there is an end to the big cry. And by just letting them drain to completion, the more you let them drain to completion, the more these feelings will be out. And then I almost guarantee you they're going to sleep way better at night, right? Try it out. Just try it for yourself and see if you doubt it. when they, you don't want to create a tantrum. You don't want to try and make them cry. This is for specific circumstances whenever your child is brimming on the edge of tears, right? Where you can see that that there are strong feelings there, and that they're brimming on the surface, and there's lots of opportunities for them to come up. Okay, and like, if you're following these 9 secrets and you're following the first one of being present and meeting your child where they're at, then those cues will be very apparent. The cues of them that they give you that they have these strong issues, right? They might start to fuss. They don't want to eat this. They don't want to eat that. Or, they're not listening to you. Or, you tell them one thing. Or, like I said, they start to reach for control patterns whenever these things come up. And as you limit these control patterns, then they get to face those feelings that are behind them. And then you can create that emotional safety cocoon so that they can just completely release those, okay? So it's a great thing to practice, is setting these firm and kind limits. And that'll make your life so much easier, because, as soon as you start to give in to limits and let them slide, you're telling them that you don't respect your own limits, and then they don't have to listen to you. So if you expect your toddler or your child to listen to you, you have to remain firm in your limits. Now, of course, there are circumstances and times when it's good and appropriate to be flexible with some limits or rules or circumstances. But usually that will come, that's something that happens at an older stage in development, where you might, have a family meeting with an older child, or it might be open for discussion, or you might just see by circumstances, that you can make an adjustment in the limit. Now, if you do this, even if with toddlers, but toddlers don't really understand if you're changing your limit or not, because they're at a different stage in their development and thinking. But at any point that you do change your limit, for example, if you say, okay, it's time to go, we have to go from, at the playground, they're playing, and all of a sudden you say, okay, it's time to go, we have to go, and they start to fuss, and you can see it's an abrupt shift in the transition. You didn't prepare them in advance, and it's going to cause a big fuss. And you might discover in that point in time, you know what, you're to blame for the abruptness of this and the stress involved in this, just because maybe you're distracted, you're talking to someone, or you're on your phone or texting or anything like that, and you forgot to be present and meet the child where they're at. You forgot to be aware of the rhythms. You didn't use any of the connective communication, right? And you might then think, you know what, it's not going to hurt if we stay another 6 minutes or so at the park and play, and it might actually make it easier for the overall transition. So then you might decide, okay, well, take that back, and then, you just take it back inside yourself, and you can then tell your child, okay, well, we'll just play a little bit longer, a few more minutes, and then for the next 6 minutes, just continuously communicate to them about the upcoming transition, that they only have a little bit longer to play, and that will help ease them into that transition, into that rhythm of shifting away from whatever they're doing into going out. So basically, just make an adjustment on your own side of things. So of course, there's no set rules of right or wrong for almost any type of circumstance in life. But there's a time to be firm, there's a time to be flexible, and being aware of that will really help with your own skill around setting limits. Okay, but again, when you set a limit, you want to try and keep it. Okay, if you say it's bedtime and they just went pee, that they're entirely full, and they start to try to prolong the time with you, or the lights on, it's a good opportunity to set a firm limit at that point. Let's move on to the 7th secret, and that's reaching through disconnect. Okay, so this again has to do around control patterns, setting limits, and stress, okay, and disconnection. So the need for connection is one of the most crucial, if not the most crucial need for children, okay? It's around emotions anyways. It's an emotional, intense need. And the reason why this is so important is because children inherently and instinctively know that their very survival is dependent upon their connection with their adult caregivers, right? Without your support, without your love and the security you provide them, they probably wouldn't survive in the world. They wouldn't have any food or shelter, right? So it's an instinctual need that they're highly, highly attuned to, is their own emotional connection to you. Now, bear in mind that they are more attuned to their subjective experience of connection to you than you are to them. Okay, now you'll always be aware of your own connection, but it's a completely different experience from their perspective and your perspective. Okay, you might be completely aware of where they're at. You know they're safe. You know they're fed. You know all of their basic needs are taken care of, but they might feel disconnected from you emotionally, right? Or they just haven't had enough attention from you. Or maybe you're distracted, you're thinking about something else, or you've been talking with other adults all day. So they might have a hard time feeling connected to you. And then that becomes, that can, if that prolongs, it can become a very real stress for children. Luckily, children are highly adaptable and buoyant, and oftentimes by giving them a lot of attention, full attention, and meeting their need for connection, a lot of their behavior just rights itself. Now, what happens if a child feels very disconnected to the point that they disconnect and, and they're avoiding you? Okay, and we can see this with toddlers. They're brimming with feelings or stress or overstimulation, right, or caught in a control pattern. They might be avoiding their connecting with you or their feelings, or connecting with other siblings or other children, and this can lead to aggressive behaviors, hitting other children, or just knocking into things, being stubborn, defiant. Other types of behavior can come from this sense of disconnection. So we want to practice reaching through this disconnect, okay? And by using connective communication is a brilliant way to reach through disconnect. We can also use physical touch and contact by touching them, eye contact, and also playing with them, playing games, engaging them in different ways. And, and another thing is just not to always let them kind of avoid you. Of course, there's a time and place to let them have their space and to deal with their own feelings. They might process it through a type of self-directed play, their own feelings and emotions. But there are other times you need to reach through that disconnect, even though they are avoiding you, okay? And by doing that, it lets them know that you're really there for them, that you're not going to let them hurt themselves or anybody else because they're caught up in their own feelings or stress, okay? That you're acting as a leader in the child's life, as a guide, to teach them the importance of really of being connected and to thinking more in terms of a holistic kind of community situational environment, rather than getting totally caught up in their own feelings and developing a more self-centered approach. Keep in mind, toddlers are naturally self-centered, and that's really a lot of their state of being and awareness. And by example and by teaching them, repeatedly the importance of sharing and being aware of others goes a long way. But again, it's by your own example that they're really going to learn these things. And when they feel connected to others, they'll be naturally generous, naturally loving. They won't be selfish or not want to share at all. It's only when they get disconnected, when they have a lot of feelings or emotions or need to process, then they might start to act selfish and not want to share and be upset with others, okay? So we want to reach through this disconnect. The next secret is natural giggles, okay? Natural giggles is a wonderful way to help children reconnect quickly and to reduce stress. And laughing is one of the natural ways that we reduce stress and come back to being present. It's one of my favorite quotes is the shortest distance between two people is laughter, okay? So
no.
Okay, someone just heard some typing. I guess I didn't mute everybody on the line. I hope that's better now. Okay, coming back to natural giggles. Okay, so natural giggles is a wonderful way to help children reconnect to those that they're dealing with, and it's a great way for you to connect with your child as well. Now, I have a chapter in my book, Democratic Parenting, on natural giggles, different ways to do it, different games that you can play to help encourage this. Now, the thing to remember is that natural giggles is not about tickling a child, okay? Now, sometimes it might be fun to tickle a child, but you have to be very careful with tickling. The reason being is it can be kind of, it can really be uncomfortable for some kids, and oftentimes adults might tickle past the point of comfort and becomes really disempowering for a child, and they want the tickling to stop before they can actually voice it because they're so caught up in laughter. Now, I know most of the time when adults or parents tickle their children, they only have the best of intentions. And again, you can always, there's nothing wrong with tickling as long as you do it from a point of presence, meeting the child where they're at. And if you can start to see it becomes too much for the child, then you kind of you stop the tickling. You don't go to the point where they're laughing so much they can barely breathe and they can't, they're yelling. They're trying to get out the word stop, 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 but they just can't get it out. But there are ways that you can play with, tickling that can be quite fun for everybody. But natural giggles is more about trying to inspire or encourage just the natural simple giggles in different circumstances. And there's different ways you can do this in your play with your child. Sometimes with puppets or with toys, you can start to make them do funny things, and it might just inspire their giggling. So when you're playing with your child, if you're doing play attention time or other type of game with them, and you start to see that they're giggling at something, you can kind of keep playing with that a little bit and to inspire their giggling. And with every giggle they do, it relieves a lot of tension that might have built up from any type of experience. And as I talked about before, tension and stress is something we cannot avoid in life. And children, toddlers, they're highly sensitive creatures. And oftentimes, it's so hard for them to keep up to the adult fast pace of life. And oftentimes, they're exposed to way too much stimulation, especially on TVs and in media and news that are all around them, that this can really affect them. And oftentimes, it affects them on almost even more of a subconscious level. They're not even aware of how much they're affected by this. But they just can't process it all. And all this types of information, stimulation, just kind of, it's brimming at the surface all the time, and their cup is completely full. They can't take in any more, and they struggle with just kind of just cooperating and go along with you. And so a way to help to drain this cup, to continue with that metaphor, is to help them, by using natural giggles is a great way. With every giggle, with every laugh, you're releasing some of that tension that's just built up with trying to deal with everything. And it also makes them feel incredibly connected. There's other types of games that you can play with a child where you take a more inept role with a child. You might play a game and start to act really silly and feel like you can't find them. One of my favorites with toddlers is to, if they're hiding, they kind of pretend like they're hiding somewhere. And even though you can see them, you might start to look in really silly places for them, like in a sock or, in a drawer, or these tiny little places where it would be impossible for them to fit. And they can sometimes get a kick out of that, to see that you're looking for them in these places, because they think, all of a sudden you're taking the more inept role. And this can be incredibly empowering and freeing for young children who are so used to having very little power, and for the parents and adults to always hold all the authority and power. So then to reverse that role and to be the inept one, and to allow them the chance to kind of feel more like they know what's going on, that you're being completely silly and it doesn't make any sense. They will start to giggle and giggle and giggle, and they'll likely want you to continue to play this game more and more and more. And with each giggle, with each laugh, this tension is being dissolved, and that full cup of emotions and feelings that are inhibiting their ability to be present and to listen and to have good judgment is being drained. And you'll see how much it affects their behavior and how much it affects their willingness to listen, just by playing natural giggles. So it's a wonderful, fun way to connect with your children and to help them relieve some of the stress and tension from their day. Okay, and the final secret to getting toddlers to behave better is to use self-directed play. Okay, so self-directed play, and here I contrast it with screen time. Oftentimes parents and adults will put their toddlers in front of the screen. There's so much programming and stuff available to them, just almost as a type of babysitter, so that they can do dinner or they can clean or whatever without being hassled and without, basically just entertaining or stimulating their child so they can get stuff done. Nothing wrong with that. However, it's a type of passive entertainment, and it doesn't give them a chance to process things, experiences or information or feelings On the contrary, it feeds them more experience and information. So it just fills up their cup even more. But it does kind of have a pacifying effect because it's completely passive entertainment, right? So it can occupy them for some time. The other thing you can do, and what I recommend, is to set up what I call self-directed play. Again, I talk about this in my Democratic Parenting book on different ways to set this up. Basically, what self-directed play is a specific amount of time that you allow them to play by themselves in a calm, safe environment where they direct their own play. Okay? So the way to set this up is basically you get a few things. You want to be careful not to provide them with too many choices of stuff to play with. And you have to adjust this based upon the child's own particularities and their developmental awareness and and also the space that you have. But the tidier and cleaner the space with the fewer amount of choices, you need to have enough so that they can start to use different things and blend them together, and really allows them an opportunity to go deeper into their play, into their own experience. What happens is they start to engage in this type of therapeutic play called symbolic play, where they are basically processing feelings, emotions, and stuff like that through their own, through what they're doing, through their play. So if they had a circumstance with someone else that might have hurt them in daycare or somewhere else, they might start to play in such a way where they're acting it out and then releasing some of the tension behind that. Okay, so as they kind of work through this type of play, they release a lot of the buildup. It's really a great way to heal tension and stress as well. It's just a way to process it all. Adults will kind of sometimes do this through journaling, for example, as writing things down. Or there's lots of even sand play therapy and stuff like that even adults get involved in to help them process feelings and experience and emotions. But play therapy is incredibly useful for children. And sometimes there's lots of play therapists out there who will do a type of play attention time with them, where there's an adult there giving good attention at the same time and participating in the play. The child still takes the lead in the play in order to direct it, because the child needs to know, they know themselves instinctively what they need to process, or what direction will help them deal with the issues that are inhibiting their clear thinking, their good judgment, their ability to behave and really be present. So self-directed play is where they do this by themselves. There's no adult involved. And this is a great thing to do, because then it allows you to still get the stuff that you need to get done. Okay? Now, keep in mind that it's not always simple, right, to get your toddler to engage in this, especially if they are fussy, especially if they have an accumulation of feelings and stuff. They might not want to let you out of their sight. They might want your full attention there. So you might still have to do a bit of play attention time with them in order to satisfy their needs for attention and connection with you, until they can actually do the self-directed play by themselves. Okay, so you have to be aware of that. You have to be flexible. And this is all about being present, coming back to the very first secret of meeting them where they're at and understanding what they're dealing with and what feelings they have. And then from there, you can help to implement these different approaches and set up this type of self-directed play. Oftentimes you have to set up a space for them to do this, and maybe you might need to initiate them with a few things so that they get the ball rolling. And you want to use connective communication the whole time so that they know that you're going off to cook dinner, or that you're right there. And oftentimes you want to set this up maybe in the living room next to the kitchen, or somewhere that they can see you. You can also do self-directed play by doing crafts or art, playing with Play-Doh, painting, or this type of thing. Of course, with toddlers, you want to be careful and set up in such a way that they're not going to make a huge mess that's going to be too difficult for you to clean up. So, you have to be aware of the consequences of some of the play that you're going to set up for them, so that they can process these feelings. But sometimes it's just a matter of them jumping around, jumping on the couch, or running around, that helps them really get some of these to process whatever they need to process. They just need to do it physically, or going on the trampoline, running around outside. These are all just very simple things that we naturally do as young children, toddlers, and humans to process feelings and experiences and to come back to being present, right? So the whole point with this approach is for it to be simple, for it to be natural, because if it's not simple, it's not natural, it's not really going to work, and it's not something that we can sustain, right? And it's not based around real human principles around psychology and how we can release feelings and come back to being present and to find ways to communicate and to relate with each other in more harmonious ways. And that's ultimately what this is all about, is to create a relationship with your toddler so that they do listen to you, so that they cooperate with you, so that they behave, and that you can work together. And as you set this up in the toddler years, you continue this same setup around relationship, around mutual respect, around you're listening to them, you're meeting them where they're at, you understand their needs, and as such they feel that you're holding them and all their needs and all their experiences, and they trust you just as much, and their respect for you continues to grow throughout the years. And as they grow up, that bond, that connection only gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you eventually get to the teenage years, which can be a huge problem if this foundation isn't set up at the beginning. But as you get to the teenage years and you have this foundation of respect and listening and trust, it'll go very smoothly, because they'll still look at you as being their best advisor. They're still going to look at you as someone that they love, that they can trust, and that they know that you respect them and that you hold them throughout all their stages, regardless of all their different developmental needs. If you start to disconnect from that, because maybe they are becoming a teen and they're starting to exhibit behaviors that you haven't processed yourself, or they start to talk about things that you're uncomfortable with, or your own triggers are getting the better of you, you start reacting, you don't know how to deal with it because of your own issues, that's going to disconnect you from your child or your teen in such a way that it's going to be harder to keep that momentum of a positive relationship and that trust and respect going. That's why it's so important to continuously work on yourself, to be aware of your own feelings, and to process those feelings so you can be really present and mindful of where your own child is at, and then to meet them there, and then to encourage them forward in the best possible way for them, for yourself, and for the entire family. So that concludes the main presentation portion of this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. And now I'll take some questions if you have any. Okay, here's a great question from Allison. She says, my 3-year-old likes to run away when we are getting ready to load up in the car. Makes for a possibly dangerous situation if we are on a busy street or parking lot. How do I keep him from doing this without physically holding on to him? Okay, that's a great question. Let me think about how to approach this. One of the things you can do is to try to kind of work on the, just using the connective communication to maintain that connection, that bond, and his attention while you're going to the car, okay? And then you can kind of guide him with your words. Maybe you can engage him in participation as well, so that he can carry something into the car, so that he feels he's a part of loading the stuff in the car. If he feels completely separate, if he doesn't feel he has any responsibility, then he feels like he can just be free to run away. Or, it might be a type of game for him. It might be an expression of a need for autonomy. He might feel that maybe his need for autonomy is not being met in other areas, and this is one time that it's kind of flaring up. So you might also look at giving him more autonomy in other safer situations in your life, in your rhythm, so it doesn't flare up as much at this point. Okay, so there's a couple of things I talked about: meeting the need for autonomy elsewhere, so that he's less trying to exert that need in dangerous situations. The other one is to engage him in participation, to bring something into the car. So, or he's loading stuff into the car and he's, therefore not free to run around. And the other one is to use the connected communication, use your words. So maybe even while you're giving him something to carry in to the car, then from there you might direct him using his word to just, jump right into the car right there. So those are a couple of ways that might be able to help. Another thing that you can do is to continuously just communicate to him. At 3 years old, if unless he's overwhelmed with tension or stress, or with feelings that in such a way that he can't process the information, he should be able to at least understand and hear what you're saying about the danger of running away from the car. Okay, so just continuously, and that's requires patience on your side, because he is young and he won't remember it all the time, and he'll be taken away by his own impulses at times to just run. But continuously doing your best to stop him physically, to set a limit, to just be aware. Okay, you can kind of, sometimes if you're meeting him where he's at and you're present to him, even if you're getting him to carry something, you can kind of sense that as soon as he drops that off in the car, he's going to be on his way. So if you can just kind of preempt that a little bit, and to get your stuff out of your hands, and therefore limit him as fast as possible physically, right? Putting a hand out. So as soon as he starts to bolt, you're there. You stop him with your hand, not in a violent or aggressive way, but in a firm, loving way. And then what you want to do is crouch. You might hold him with both hands, look him in the eye, and then just tell him in a really loving way, sweetie, you can't run. You have to stay here. You have to stop running because it's dangerous. And then explain to him, then point to him, show him, say, see, there's a road there, there's cars, and then if they hit you, it could hurt, it could be dangerous. And to go through that explanation and point to things in such a way that he can verbally, sort of visually understand that, so he can make sense of it. And you might point to cars that are coming as well, and then just continuously give him that information. And again, you might, maybe after one time it won't be enough. And if, like I said, if he is clouded by tension or stress, this probably won't even get through. It's not going to mean anything to him, because he's just looking for a way to to just be free, or maybe his need for autonomy is not being met enough. So that's all he cares about, is having that need for autonomy met. Again, in which case you want to set up the circumstances inside the home in a safe environment where he can be completely autonomous, and he can exert that same energy and intention without putting himself in danger. So does that make sense, Allison? I hope that's helpful. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, here's another question from Kim. Okay, can these 9 strategies be used for sleep issues? Toddlers not wanting to sleep in their own rooms, only wanting mom or dad to lay with them, incessant crying, screaming, aren't resorted to a gate at the door and keep the child in their room. Great question. I'm glad you asked that, Kim. So let's just go back to these 9 secrets here, these different strategies. So let's see how they can be applied to a toddler with sleep issues. Okay, so first, presence, meeting the child where they are at, so we understand that they're having some issue with staying in their room. Okay, so the big thing here is if they're coming always wanting to sleep in, not wanting to stay in their room, go with mom or dad, or just wanting one or the other. Okay, if they're just wanting mom and or dad, then that's a sign of a control pattern, number 4, okay? That they're exerting some type of control pattern. They're trying to exert their power and finding some type of thing that they're clinging onto in order to help soothe them, okay? That's the sign of a control pattern. The desperation, the intense feelings of crying and screaming, that's a sign that they have some intense feelings that they need to release. So the best thing to do is to set a firm healing limit, okay, in such a way that you allow them to fully cry, fully let out those feelings. Now, because they don't want to stay alone and they want to come to your room, or something else, that's a sign that their need for connection may be not being met enough. So you can take care of all of this in one foul swoop by setting a healing limit in such a way that you don't let them out of their room, but you stay present with them. And while they scream and cry, you might just stay at the door, okay? You're not going to let them out, and you're just going to let them know they're going to sleep in their room. And, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take, you're going to have to face the fire. You're going to have to be there with them while they drain these intense feelings. And that's the hardest part for parents. The hardest part is just, being present to that, listening to that, and just helping them get those feelings out. But once those feelings are out, it's so much easier, because then that control pattern, that issue is completely dissolved. But the more you postpone it, the more you give into those limits. You set a limit, and then they fuss enough, or they make enough of a scene, or they get crazy enough, and then we kind of give into that. And that message that we're telling them is that if they keep fussing or keep freaking out, we're going to give in. Okay, so they're going to keep fussing, and so then the intensity will just build and build and build. But finally, once they feel that you're not going to give in no matter what, the intensity will build and build and build, and then they'll go into that really deep healing type of sobbing and crying and just releasing it all, and then all the tension will be dissolved. Now, it doesn't mean it's not going to come up the next night or even the next night after that, but you'll see that after some time, I don't know how many times it will take, because it's really dependent upon your own child and where they're at and what's built up and the patterns that have developed and how they process things. Sometimes children process things really easily and quick, and they can move on and let things go. Other types will just hold on to them more. There might be other types of stresses in their environment, in their life, in a different type of area, that are affecting them in such a way that every evening that they're still built up from stress. Maybe they're being bullied in daycare or somewhere else. Who knows? But or maybe there's just too much stimulation, or maybe they're watching TV or being stimulated too late before bed. So therefore, they haven't transitioned smooth enough into a more passive, quiet nighttime routine or rhythm. So if you might have to adjust your rhythm as well to a couple of hours before bed, to start to really tone it down, and to bring them into that state where they start to feel more relaxed, more comfortable with the sleeping. So there's lots of things that you need to be aware of, and that's why it's impossible to say exactly how many big cries or healing limits you might need to set for them to really kind of release and let go, and to be realize that that old pattern of running out of their rooms, or requiring one parent or the other, or any of the other issues that you might have to any other ways to deal with the issue, to get over the issues, any other control patterns that they developed are released. So you can definitely use these different 9 secrets with any of the types of behaviors, whether it's sleep or anything else. So sometimes the natural giggles, you might be a way to kind of connect with them beforehand, to help them feel more comfortable and confident. And sometimes the more you connect with them too, it meets such a strong need. They just love it. They want more and more of that connection. And then when the time for disconnect comes, then they can really, those feelings are right at the surface, and they really have a big cry. But then again, remember that all feelings have a beginning and an end. And once you do drain those feelings, they're gone. They're gone. Maybe they're not all gone. More might come up the next night, or more get developed. But you make progress with each of these, with all these crying. Like one of my mentors said, every tear heals. Okay, so just remember that there's nothing wrong with the crying and screaming, but you need to set that limit so that it doesn't go to a point where they know that they can just fuss or freak out enough, and then you'll finally give in. Also, the more that you can stay present and connected with them while they're crying, and it takes time, you might have to invest a good hour to get them through this, a good hour a night to help them through this transition, where you're just standing at the door, and the lights are off, and you're telling them, I'm here with you, sweetheart. I hear you. And they're crying and crying. They say, no, mommy, no, and they're begging, they're pleading, they're sounding so desperate. And inside your heart, you're thinking, oh my God, should I really be doing this? Am I a terrible mom? Is this the type of abuse? My poor child. But remember, they're completely safe. There's nothing wrong. You're actually there emotionally with them. You're not letting them cry all alone, which can be harder for them, and they're safe physically. So what you're doing is you're just providing that emotional safety cocoon, and you're giving them that cocoon is made up of your love, your patience, your attention, okay, and your affection, which might be communicated more verbally if you're not quite actually like, rubbing their backs or touching them, which you can also do to help them heal through these feelings. But especially around this bedtime transition, because they start to freak out usually when you're going outside the room. That's usually when the tears come out. That's a great method, is to kind of just stand in the doorway there, and so that they know you're there, but they also know you're leaving and then you're not going to come back. And they cry and cry and cry. And then at some point, you might just close the door and go away, and you'll hear them freaking out and crying. And then you might come back, after 5 minutes, and you might just say, I hear you, sweetie. I'm still here with you. Just to verbally reach through that disconnect, because what can happen after a while is they cry and cry and cry. They just kind of get caught up in their own feelings, and then they feel isolated again. So when you reach through that with your words, by just giving them a verbal cue that you're still there, that can really help meet their need for connection. And sometimes they can go even deeper into that healing type of cry, and then they don't feel so isolated. So it reduces also some of their anxiety that might be associated with being alone in their room at night. So I hope this is helpful, Kim. I know from experience, I've worked through this myself. It's not easy at all, because it does require an incredible amount of patience and forbearance on your side to actually be there with them through these intense feelings, and oftentimes you have to repeat it, and I remember with our own son that we had to do this with him, and almost almost every night, especially if he spent time at his grandmother's, because he was so overstimulated and overcoddled, and all his needs for autonomy were never met there. So even though she gave him tons of love and she had the best intentions, he would always come back with tension from there. So he would, and then by the time nighttime comes, then all these types of feelings would really drain out. So is this helpful? Yeah, good. Okay, Allison has another question. She says, when dad and my son are together, they have a fantastic time. When the three of us are together, our son won't hug or kiss daddy or say goodnight or goodbye. How do we handle this? How old is your son? 3. Okay. Well, first off, I don't really see what the what the big issue is here. It seems more like it's more daddy who might feel hurt by this than your son. Is it just that you want to kind of teach him more around the being polite and affectionate? Do we ignore it? Yeah, you could ignore it. I would just ignore it if I were you, and just for daddy, for him to make the initiative to just hug him and kiss him regardless, right? That's what I would do. Because it's really natural for toddlers and babies and even young children to be more connected with the mother. It's just more of a natural instinct, even if especially because usually it's the mother who spends more time with them. So okay, so daddy gets his feelings hurt. Well, yeah, so just I can understand that. It's we all want our little ones to love us the most. But remember, toddlers are they're kind of they're irrational beings, and it doesn't mean he doesn't love his daddy at all. But what I would just encourage daddy to do is to just to love, to reach through and to do the affectionate acts himself to his son, to show him that, right? And for him to take the initiative rather than trying to make the child to do that. Because the problem, if you try to make your boy do this, the child to do this, then you're making him do it. It's not coming from his kind of natural, generous, sincere desire to be affectionate. Not that he doesn't want to be affectionate, because as you said, when they're together, they have a great time and they're affectionate and they're loving. So that's in him. Obviously, he loves his daddy, and he's affectionate towards him. But he might just feel a lot more connected to mommy, and maybe because of one of his types of quirks, or who knows why, he's just kind of caught up with mommy at that point in time. But he doesn't mean to make daddy isolated. So But if you start to kind of put pressure on that, if you try to make him do that or make a big deal for that, he's going to feel that emotionally, and that actually will create tension for him around being affectionate with daddy. So you want to avoid doing that, okay? You want to avoid trying to pressure him or to make him do that. That's a big thing that happens a lot of time with toddlers that are forced to share things rather than encouraged to share things. And there's a big difference there. Because if they're forced or coerced with negative feelings or negative pressure, it can enhance their resentments. But if they're encouraged with love and care, they'll do it more naturally. So what I would do here is you could just encourage him to hug his daddy, or if daddy just reached in and just did it himself, then the pattern and routine will get set. And then when you do encourage him to do it, he'll do it more naturally. So does that make sense? Good. You're welcome, Allison. Any other questions? Okay, what do you do when you ask your toddler a question and they stand there and ignore you? Okay, well, the first thing you can do is use these 9 secrets, and the first one is just meet them where they're at. And, you might think, okay, you just asked them a question and then they ignored you. Where are they at and why did they ignore you? And you might just realize, okay, they're in a completely different state. The question was way too analytical or rational for them, or something. Their mind was just somewhere else. Maybe they didn't fully understand. Maybe they need to think about it. They didn't know the answer to that, and then that might just cause them to just turn away rather than say, because remember, toddlers, their verbal and communication capacity is very low. They're still learning it. So if they don't know the answer to it, or they don't know how to answer it, or just in the moment if their attention is somewhere else, they don't know how to kind of bridge that road between your question, how they feel about it, their answer, and the appropriate response, then they might just turn away, right? They might just ignore you. Where if an adult or an older child does that, it would be kind of rude or unacceptable, right? But the toddlers will just might just be a natural way that they behave, as a way to kind of just, they don't know any better. So what you might try to do is more is just kind of reach through that disconnect. You might try to pose the question in a different way. You might shift your body language. You might go in front of them. You might approach them a little bit differently, or your tone of voice might be a bit different. So there's lots of different things you can do to get the answer for that question. Now, a big thing with questions and toddlers and young children is that oftentimes parents and adults ask way, way too many questions. And the reason I say the too many, as in, there's something that is not positive about asking all these questions, is that it brings them out of their physical and somatic experience really into the more intellectual and rational experience. And, there's a really big emphasis in our culture and society on the intellect. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the toddler stage, the most important thing is, spatial awareness and communication. And there's so much of their somatic experience that it is developing that we want to try to encourage them to stay into that experience as much as possible. And usually we need to ask them way fewer questions than we think. Okay, and it's usually because we're approaching children from our adult perspective, where we would ask questions to see where they're at, what they want, this type of thing. A big problem too I see is they're just giving them too many options. Giving toddlers too many options about what to eat, what to do, this type of thing. And a toddler, is way too young to even understand the consequences of their choices. And the other problem too is when you start to give them options, they can just say, well, no, I don't want that, and I don't want that. And then you give it to them, and they say, no, I still don't want that. And you say, well, that's what you asked for. I asked you wanted this A or B, and you said B, so here's B. So, why are you rejecting it now? But you got to understand they're coming from a completely different experience, and that you set yourself up by giving them the options in the first place. You basically allowed them to reject one thing or another. So the moment that you open the door for them to reject something, they might just reject it. So, but if you just say, if you just give them something, to eat, and without having the option to opt out of that, or if you kind of just, give them something to play with, or you just, you just dress them, or, give them the clothes rather than giving them options, that will make for a lot less defiance and resistance and, opposition behavior, because you're not opening the door for them to say no to things. Okay. So what I would suggest is to reduce the amount of questions you ask, right? Because oftentimes the moment you ask a question, you're taking them out of their present experience. And remember, like I said before, toddlers and young children are so in the moment. They're so entirely present, and their experience of the moment is way beyond what we're seeing in the moment, because they're more sensitive to things. They have a completely different awareness and perception of reality than we do, and they have different needs as well. And they have less understanding of a lot of their environment than we do. So they're completely in the moment, and the moment we start to ask them questions, we take them out of the moment and into their minds, and sometimes they're not there, or they don't have the capacity to process the question in the from their state, and they might just answer it one way or another, just to kind of give you an answer to get you off their back, because they know, either maybe you've trained them that if you give them an answer, then they can, that's all you want is just one answer or the other. And then once you kind of follow up based upon their answer, and then they kind of still resist it or reject it, you might feel entirely frustrated. But that's because you're setting it up like that because you're not meeting them where they are at developmentally and psychologically. Okay, so if you can understand that they're really in the moment, a lot of the stuff they can understand, and and the consequences of the questions that you're usually asking are beyond their scope, and oftentimes with way too many options as well, it's hard for them to kind of figure out one thing or the other. And of course, there's lots of times where lots of questions that are really simple and that they can understand and they can answer, and that that you can engage them on that level. But it's just something to be aware of, to be cautious about, to help make the relationship smoother and the transitions easier with children and toddlers especially. Does that make sense, Allison? Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, one more question? Sure. How do we get our son to stop whining? That's the million-dollar question right there, isn't it? Okay, so, remember, whining, typically desperate kind of feelings, fussiness, those are all signs of some type of stress or tension buildup, or a need that's gone unmet. Okay, so there's different ways that you can kind of deal with that, but a big one is kind of just allowing the tears to kind of to heal any tension. But sometimes whining is a result of unfirm limits, right? Limits that you try to set, but you've taught them through experience, through repeatedly letting them get their way through a limit that you try to set, because they whine enough. Right? If they know that if they whine enough, they get what they want, even when you first said no, then they're going to keep whining, because you're teaching them that by the pattern that you're setting up. So you got to look at the circumstance of the whining, and when it's coming up and why it's coming up. And okay, Kim Wright. Does that ever stop? I have two boys, 16 and 12, and I haven't seen the end of the whining yet. That's true, Kim, and even many adults will whine as well. So whining is definitely a pattern that we can develop and that we can use, and it's basically just a way of trying to communicate our needs, and so the other person hears them, and to try and get our way. So we want to just be aware of how we set that up for our children, whether, again, if it's just because they know if they whine enough, they can get their way through a limit. It's a type of kind of almost a manipulation. Or, sometimes with toddlers or younger children, it's just simply because they have an excess of accumulated stress or feelings or emotions or tension, and that the whining is just the beginning stages of trying to release that or to access that, and then eventually release that, through, it could be through tears, crying, natural giggles, or sometimes meeting their needs in other ways. They might be whining because they just have unmet need around, full attention, connection, autonomy, other types of needs that might be unmet as well. So I hope that helps. Okay, so Kim says that in our personal experience, whining and moodiness is exasperated when I don't feed them good food. Great, that's true. I had a friend who called that getting hangry, right? You start to get hungry, you get angry when you're hungry, right? So you definitely have to, that comes back to needs, right? Just basic human physical well-being needs around good nutrition, right? Good sleep, right? Sometimes they don't get enough sleep. If they don't get enough exercise too, they just get sluggish, that can just cause them to get moody as well. Okay, so Allison says, do you tell them you will only listen if they talk in a big boy voice? Well, that's kind of a bit, manipulative a little bit, because you're kind of, you can do that, but again, like they're doing their best, especially at a toddler age, right? It's just, they're doing their best to try to communicate to you, where they are at and their needs. So, by trying to, force them to speak in a way that's, outside of actually how they're feeling, you're kind of setting them up to separate themselves from their feelings. But rather what we want to do is allow them to kind of face their feelings and to kind of, work through their feelings as well. But, you can say that, but it's not, it really depends on how you use it, right? And, it's not like a huge manipulative tactic. There's a lot worse ones out there that can affect them. But, you might, but the only part I don't like about that is that you would say you will only listen to them, right? Because you want them to feel that like you're always there, that you will listen to them, even though at some points, sometimes it's very appropriate to ignore certain behavior, and and sometimes it's okay to ignore whining behavior. But I'd say usually with older children, that's when you want to start to use that. With toddlers, it's they're learning. So they're just learning how to express themselves now. So if they start to whine, we can't really. We want to more kind of just make sure that their needs are met, and that that the limits that you're setting are not so flexible that that's something you're teaching them is to whine, because that's the way that they know they can get ahead. When the children get older, like around 7 or 8. And then they're still whining, then you can start to, say, I'm going to listen to you only if you express it more clearly, right? Then that can kind of help set them up. But the problem of using this big boy voice is that you're starting to kind of set up this this type of relationship where that they start to fear that whether or not they're meeting your expectations, and whether they're good enough, right? Whether they're expressing themselves in a good enough way that they're going to get your attention, and you're listening. So, but what we want instead, teach our children and make them feel that we're there for them no matter what, that we're always going to listen to them and be there for them and pay attention to them and do our best to meet them where they are at, okay? And even if it's in a really ugly and difficult place where they're at and they're really struggling emotionally and having a hard time expressing themselves, we're still going to meet them there, okay? Rather than hold them to the standard that can kind of raise a little bit of anxiety, because they might feel insecure about being able to actually get to that standard, being able to please you enough and to meet that standard. And then that's can be a bit of a problem, is because you can start to raise that bar to them, even being unaware of that, in such a way that they can feel quite anxious about whether or not they're expressing themselves good enough, and then that can kind of lead a little bit to eventually a bit of lack of confidence in some ways about how they express themselves. But if instead you want to just try and meet them where they're at and to guide them and to express themselves more clearly, rather than to communicate these abstract kind of standards of big boy voice or these other things, which they might not fully understand about what you're implying, because they're just trying to come at it from the best that they know. based upon how they're feeling, the experiences they're having, and perhaps the patterns that you've allowed to exist by how you set limits or how you kind of relate to them. So I hope that makes sense. So Kim asks, do you advocate timeouts as a consequence to misbehavior? If yes, to what degree? Removal from the room into their bedroom, or just on a chair in the room? And if no timeouts, what is a better consequence? Okay, so from my experience, there's not a need for timeouts if you use these democratic parenting approaches. If you don't use these democratic parenting approaches, then sometimes it's hard to kind of get control of situations that can escalate in such a way. That you might feel a need to kind of separate the child from whatever's happening. The most important thing, the only time, I do not advocate timeouts as a general rule. The only time that I might advocate separating a child from other children is if one is being violent or aggressive or hurting or bullying another child. But the important thing, see, the biggest problem with the timeout is that it isolates the child, and that's a extreme punishment that enhances their disconnection. And usually one of the deeper reasons the child is misbehaving to begin with is that they feel disconnected from the other children or the parents or their environment. So their misbehavior is actually rooted in that sense of disconnection. And when you enhance that disconnection, you're increasing the root cause of the problem, and therefore getting farther from the solution. So you're basically trying to just take care of the issue on a superficial level, but by putting band-aids over it and by trying to teach them that it's going to get worse, right? If you're feeling bad now, it's going to get worse if you behave in that way. But instead, we want to assist our children, especially with toddlers, right? Because we're just they have very little control over their own impulses and their own feelings, and we want to try to help guide them towards being more empathetic to others in their environment and to listening more. And really, that a lot of that depends upon their own emotional state and whether they're overburdened by feelings, emotions, tension, stress, information, experiences that they haven't processed. So they're not really aware of what they're doing, and they have very little choice in this situation. But the moment that you start to use timeouts or other types of consequences, and you explain the consequences intellectually and rationally, and then you punish them so that they can feel bad emotionally when they're already feeling emotionally overwhelmed and bad, and they're not acting from a place of clear awareness, they don't learn anything. They don't actually remember the experience. Because again, if we come back using the analogy of the full cup, okay, their cup is brimming with feelings and emotion, tension, experience, information, and they're having a hard time. They're not thinking clearly, so they do something that might hurt another child, or they misbehave in some type of way. So they're not thinking from the frontal cortex of the brain, the higher thinking, judgment. They're thinking more from the amygdala part of the brain, which is a lizard impulsive brain center. Okay, and then if we punish them, we make them feel bad, then that gets triggered even more, because they feel, the amygdala gets triggered even more, and they get farther from the frontal cortex. But at the same time, we're trying to get them to think from that frontal cortex. So the way to actually do it is not to punish them, not to increase their anxiety or their negative feelings, but to help them drain those feelings. And once those feelings are drained, they're going to come back to that state of calmness, awareness, clear attention, and from there, once they can be in the frontal cortex of their brain, then we can communicate, then we can teach them, and then that stuff is actually going to sink in. It's going to make sense. And anyways, they're going to more naturally want to cooperate with those around them as well in that state, because they're, it's children's natural state of awareness is to want to be generous, to want to be connected. All toddlers and children that I've ever seen and who I've ever met who are not acting out of tension and stress are so sweet and so generous and so careful and so empathetic. And what we want to do is just help them return to that state where they feel connected and they act from that state naturally. Okay, and so So the problem with timeouts again is that it makes them feel isolated. It can make them also feel resentful because sometimes, they're acting out of their impulses and emotions, but they feel wronged or hurt by another person, and then they're getting the punishment for it. And so they feel that it's completely unjust, and it just enhances their own resentment, and they don't feel like, they're not going to want to be better because they feel that the whole thing is unjust. So I'm not an advocate of timeouts. And of course, okay, if a child hurts another, they need to be separated. They need to kind of cool down a little bit. But again, the most important thing there is to connect with that child, is to make them know that you care for them. Because if a child hurts another child, the one that's doing the hurting feels the other one's pain. It hurts them to hurt another child, right? You can just see it in their eyes. You can feel it around them. That they don't. Nobody likes to hurt another person if they're connected to their heart and their feelings, which young children usually are. Unless they've been really traumatized again and again and again. But for any of you who are listening to this, I'm sure that's not the case. So sometimes it's just that they get a little wrapped up in their, in the amygdala fight or flight response, so they're acting out of stress, and they really have no conscious choice. And by trying to instill into them the rationale why these consequences are happening, they want to follow your advice, they want to behave, they want to have your approval, they want to more than anything. But that doesn't mean that the next time they get triggered and emotional that they're not going to act out again, right? It doesn't solve the issue, right? Even if they know that because they're not going to be thinking about, well, if I do this, I know the punishments, right? Because that's what's going to happen. I want to avoid the punishment, so I'm going to be good. They're not going to act like that if they're coming from the amygdala center of the brain because they're not thinking rationally. Okay, does that make sense? Right. Okay, good. Refreshing to hear that you don't advocate timeouts, guiding to better behavior and understanding their emotions by loving them and providing them what they need. Exactly, Kim. That's exactly the message. Okay, so Kim says, if a behavior surrounds a toy or screen time, I usually remove the item. Is that okay? Yeah, it can be okay. Again, it depends how you do it, right? If you do it in a harsh, kind of punitive way where they feel like it's, kind of ripped out from their experience, it can be hard for them, but you can help them through processing that, right? If it's done in a gentle, kind of communicative way, and you're just kind of saying, you know what, you two can't share this item. I think I'm just, how about you both play with this, and then I'm just going to take this out. And they might still throw a fit because the feelings have built up anyways, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with the children throwing a fit because that's an opportunity for them to heal and to release those feelings and tears and to come back to the situation from a place of clear awareness. And the same thing with screen time. There's very rarely where I advocate, putting a child in front of the screen to help them deal with anything. It's usually just a way to kind of entertain them, or you use as a substitute as a babysitter or childcare sometimes. So, there's nothing wrong with turning off the screen. But again, it's again how you do it, and what you're communicating and what the child's feeling throughout that experience. And if you do it harshly, and punitively, what the child's going to be more traumatized is by the harshness and the tone, and the general feeling that comes by how you're acting. So that's right. Calmly remove the item with positive communication and not harshly. Exactly. Okay, so that's it for today's webinar. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. It was really a pleasure to go through this information with you, and it was great to hear your questions and to interact with you all. And so I look forward to the next webinar. I think that probably won't be until the new year. We have a few of them new ones that are going to come up in the new year. You'll get emails about that. And if you ever want to listen to any of the previous webinars that we've recorded, you can do that by going to the Parent Learning Club and look through those, and you can get access to the recording. And this one will be uploaded as well to your account in the Parent Learning Club for you to watch again as many times as you want. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And remember, every single day, give your child all your love. Give yourself that same love too, and together we can build a brighter future. Thank you.